the biggest challenge I think for me with regard to cutting the bed down was making sure I had all the measurements in the right places. My bed had been run into a couple times in the back, so that whole area around the taillights was not perfect when I cut it apart, which made it a little bit of a challenge to put it back together again, because basically you're cutting through half a dent and scooting it forward, and now you've got metal that is dented on one side and nice and smooth on the other. That was a little bit of a challenge. Um, and the biggest, probably the biggest thing for me was going slow enough to not burn holes in it. And you learn about that with your test section. If you get yourself a door scanner or whatever, but you get excited and you get moving really fast, or at least I did, and had to remind myself to slow down. And but again, I mean, once I had the method figured out, and I'd watched Kyle's video any number of times, and I talked to him ahead of time to let him know what I was doing. I didn't want to give away any of his measurements, because at that time the video, you had to buy the video. It wasn't out on his website. I didn't want to give any of that away. I wanted to send people his way because he's got the method. He's figured this out. And I just wanted to show that it's easy to do if you take the time and are willing to give it a shot. But yeah, I mean, it worked out fine. When I got done with it, they were both exactly the same length. I was amazed, but it all worked out just fine. So the bigger challenge, I think, of the whole thing was sorting out how I was going to do the bed floor, because there was no video out for the bed floor. I just had to take a look at it and figure it out. And I came up with a method that's in the book, that allows you to keep some of the way the floor is designed on these trucks. It's got kind of the corrugated section in the back, and as you come into the cab, or at least the front panel, it flattens out. And a lot of people just hack them off, slide it forward, bolt it in, and then you've got this corrugated section that's underneath that front panel, that header panel. And I figured out that if you run your cutting wheel right along the cross member underneath, you could take 2 inches out. I think it was 2 inches. I can't remember now. Slide it back in, weld it up, and then you still have that factory seam, factory look. So stuff like that, you just got to slow down and think about it. But it works out just fine if you do that.
Yeah, and that's what we did on Orange Slice, obviously a square body versus a 6772.
Mhm.
But those beds, if you break down a square, long bed square body, they're literally meant to be cut down. It is hilarious. It's all the
Yeah.
stamping is there, and you do cut. I think it's 14 inches from the front, so you shrink it there so that you get that paneling to be right. And the other thing on a square body is they have the filler for your fuel. Since you've got saddle tanks, you've
Right.
got the two little small humps, and you want those to be in the right places as well. So you're dealing with that a little bit. And then you keep a little extra on the back so that you can fold it over and kind of keep that look. But it does look like you did a great job. Do you remember? Are you using a Millermatic? What are you using?
I'm using a Lincoln SP170T.
Okay, it
So it's
happens
a
to be
hand,
sitting
it's a
right there.
it's a hand-me-down welder. Came from a buddy of mine who built hot rods for years and just decided he was done and got out of it. And I ended up with some of his equipment, and it's basically a MIG welder that runs on 220.
Yeah,
And
yeah. So do you remember, did you use 3.0 or 3.5?
uh, geez, I don't remember. I think it was 3.0.
And then do you remember like your speed and your heat setting and where you were at?
I'd have to go look. I went off of what was recommended and then
Yeah,
took it from there.
yeah, I
Generally,
do.
I erred on being just a little bit hotter and then trying to hit it quickly and not put a lot of extra time into it. But again, you're going to probably have welders that listen to this pod. They're going to know a lot more about it than I do. This is just, you know, getting it as close as I could.
Yeah, and we're not welders and we don't pretend to be welders. So the we're hobbyists. The other thing I do remember Kyle saying is how he could get such clean lines and everything. He just said hot and fast, hot and fast. So
Yeah.
it sounds like and his fast and your fast. Okay, so then you cut it down, and this is another one and another kit that is really good. Now Kyle has a pretty good kit. Kyle and I actually kind of developed this when we were doing Orange Slice. And I do think it's a little pricey, not Kyle's shortening kit, but Brothers has a really, and it walks you through it very specific. So if you feel like you're more comfortable with that, Kyle's is more of what I would call a fish plate. So going back to the old days, the way that we would do it is we would cut it and then we would use a little fish plate, which is kind of a little triangulated plate to stiffen that up. And for the audience, another thing that's kind of known is hell, after you get done shortening a long bed and fish plating it, you actually could end up cracking the other areas. You're not going to crack that area because
Right.
you strengthen that area so much.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and the brothers, I don't know what that retails for. It is a very nice kit. It'll spoon feed you too, because it tells you exactly where to go. I want to say it's like 169 bucks. And maybe it's even more.
I think it's more. Yeah. I
Is
think
it?
it's almost, yeah. Well, I don't quote me, but I think it's almost twice that now.
Okay. So
But
yeah, it's a good kit. But depending on where you're at, Kyle's fish plate kit, which really you line up the holes, it gives you spots to weld it. You're good to go. A couple C clamps. I would say the difference is that you're going to do a little bit more of the research, which has already been done out there for you. Whereas the brothers kit almost tells you like exactly because the way that it's built, it walks you through the whole thing.
But you do have to keep in mind, especially with the 6772s, that if you're building a 3/4 ton, most of those kits are built for half ton and the cab mounts are in a different spot. So you've got to remember to move the cab mounts because it's where you cut it is in the rear cab mount area.
Yeah, and another thing too, and I don't know if Kyle still has them, but he was doing cab mounts because of that.